Okay, it's been about 6 months since I last posted, and that topic was on the Nanjing Massacre in Nanjing, China. And it was also about the 100 Years of Humiliation, of which the massacre was one part. And so that was a really heavy period, so I thought I would do a lighter topic now. Specifically, it's about men taking their birds for a walk to a local park and talking and chatting with each other. And so this really caught me because also being an older man, I really identified with why this appealed to these men. It just seemed like a very kind of civilized, nice thing to do, reason for guys to get together and talk. And so this post here is actually word for word what I wrote on Facebook at the time in 2014, May 2014. So I'll just read it first. This is a park I walk through almost every morning and where almost every morning older, retired, men gather with their birds. So it was exclusively men, never saw a woman. This is my whole time in China. I saw this many places, never a woman. Never a young man either, older men. They walk bringing multiple cages or carry them in special carriers on their bicycles or e-bikes before hanging them in the trees. So they're literally bringing these cages, attaching them to their bicycles or e-bikes and going to a nearby park and they have hooks on the top of these cages and hanging them in trees together. Like a group of men are doing this, usually in the same location each time. Then they sit and chat while the dozens of birds in their cages sing. I haven't done in-depth research yet, but a New York Times article about Chinese men in the US years earlier, specifically in New York City, says this tradition goes back hundreds of years. And doing a little more research, the hundreds of years are to the beginning of the Qing dynasty, which started in 1644 and was the last dynasty in China. So Qing being Qing, and it ended in 1912. And so China has not had an emperor since. And so interestingly enough, this actual leisure activity came from the court of the emperor at the beginning of the Qing dynasty and continued on and has continued on in China. And I read some articles about there is some criticism that it was this activity of the men of the court spending all their time in leisure hanging their birds in trees and listening to them sing and chatting with each other that caused the downfall of the last dynasty. So believe it or not, these caged birds are suspected of causing the downfall of the dynasty, the last dynasty in China. Now, birds, having pet birds in Chinese history has a long history. And I couldn't pinpoint the date, but it's initially associated with scholars. And so this is from another post in the same year, November 2014, where I'd been to a museum and from that visit wrote this post on Facebook. Scholars weren't worth their salt unless they had pet birds, a calligrapher brush, ink, and an ink pot. And so these were things that were associated with scholars. And, this, I'm guessing, started maybe around Confucius's time, which is roughly 2,500 years ago. So anyway, keeping a pet bird in China has probably been around for a few thousand years. It's just carrying the birds in cages to parks, taking them for walks, is something that started in the Qing dynasty. And there's a lot to looking after these birds. So to care for one properly involves a daily regimen of walks and socialization. So the men are trying to socialize the birds to each other. They're trying to get their birds to learn new songs. So a bird is worth more money if it knows more songs. And it's trying, and the men are trying to get them to learn songs from each other. There's also a lot of work in looking and giving them the right food, because that's associated with the coloration of their feathers. So if you don't feed them well, the colors are likely going to fade. And then if you also don't feed them well, they're probably not going to be as exuberant about singing. So this can take a lot of work to look after one of these birds properly. So this is the cage in the museum that I saw that talked about the history of keeping birds and associating it with scholars in China. So this is just a cage that they had in the museum. And here's a modern day cage, and it looks almost identical, like right down to the food bowls for the bird and the water bowls, made out of porcelain dishes, made out of porcelain anyway, and colorful. Millet, you can see, is the kind of food that they're serving, but apparently they mix that with egg, raw egg, that they put over the millet. And it takes, I believe, a couple of hours to prepare this. So it's a lot of work. And I believe they also give them the odd grasshopper as a snack. And this is one of the kinds of birds that men will keep. This is called a Japanese white-eye. Just notice that it has a definite eye ring. And that will relate to a story that I'm going to tell you later. So here's a photo from the park that I was regularly visiting, and this man volunteered to hold up a bird and just show what they do. And you can see on the bicycles, some of them have cages, so some men will have more than one cage, not just one bird. They'll have multiple birds that they'll bring to the park. And there are bird markets. You can go to a market where the men are buying and selling birds, and so you can see all the cages here and the birds and buying and selling going on. And there's a variety of species, which I'll talk about later. So to deepen the story, this is just a little more from that article in the New York Times. I'll just read what I posted from a May 23rd, 2014 posting. The article mentions the tradition is to have a Huamei, which is a type of bird. It says that the Huamei, lives south of the Yangtze River, and Nanjing is just on, but south of the Yangtze River, and the Huamei has a white eye ring. The article goes on to say that Huamei means painted brow in Chinese, and it's for the white circle around the bird's eyes. And legend has it that it's named for a beautiful young woman, Shi Shi, who lived in the spring and autumn period, 770 to 404 BC, whose eyebrows resembled the bird's markings. From my language partner at the time, I've learned that Shi Shi was considered the most beautiful Chinese girl in history. Apparently, she was so beautiful she could make a flower feel ashamed. This story is definitely part of the appeal for men taking these caged birds out. I just love this story. And anyway, here is a photo of a Huamei. So it's a kind of thrush, and I'll have another close-up of one, but you can definitely see the markings around the eye. That first bird is actually called a Japanese white-eye, and I'm guessing they're cheaper. The Huamei are more expensive. And I heard in New York, for instance, and it was in the 90s. The article was written in the mid 90s, 1996 or something like that. And at the time, a Huamei would cost $500, one that hadn't been trained to sing and or didn't know that many songs. But if it knew a few songs, they were worth $1,000. Anyway, so this is the true Huamei, and it especially for the markings. And also the song, it has a very nice song. And so that Japanese white-eye, the bird I showed earlier, I believe is a lot cheaper. So that's why men would have a Japanese white-eye. And I guess because of the markings, it kind of resembled shishe also. So here's a nice photo of the eye markings of the Huamei. So you can see it's quite beautiful. And this is just a painting, obviously fairly modern, that I found online that's supposed to represent Shi. Now, she was one of 4 beauties in Chinese history. I won't get into the other 3. I'm not knowledgeable about them yet. But this whole idea of beautiful women is very big in Chinese society to this day. I think probably the dream of every Chinese girl is to be as good looking as she should. And so she was the original one. She's the one of the 4. She's the one who is considered the most beautiful. Now here's the story of Shi. So Madame Shi is known today as one of the 4 great beauties of Chinese history. Apart from her exceptional looks, Shi was also patriotic, smart, and sophisticated woman who lived around 400 BCE in the kingdom of Yue during the Warring States period. At the time of our story, the king of Wu had just annexed the kingdom of Yue, and the king of Yue was held hostage for 3 years. When the king of Yue was finally ransomed and returned to his own kingdom, he vowed to bring about the demise of the king of Wu. So think of China was made up of multiple countries at the time. This is the Warring States period, so there were different emperors fighting back and forth between their kingdoms, and they occupied sections of China. So you still don't have China. It's not the same real estate when we talk about China today. So these 2 kingdoms tended to be in the southeastern part of China. So one day Fan Li, the prime minister of Yue, was walking in the countryside and strolling along a river when he came across the bewitchingly beautiful Shi washing silk garments on its banks. He immediately recruited her and lovingly taught her the art of poetry, song, and dance. She was gradually transformed into one of the most beautiful and irresistible women who had ever lived. And so these leisure activities, poetry, song, and dance, these are traditional activities of the well-to-do in China to this day. So lots of young girls will learn poetry, and a musical instrument is another, or song, or a dance. So during the 3 years of her education and training, so, she didn't know this originally. She was not from a wealthy family, so she learned these activities. The 2 fell madly in love with each other, but never dared to express their true feelings until their final journey to Wu together. By this time, Shi and Fan Li knew it was probably too late, and that their love would remain unrequited forever. When Fan Li felt she was ready, he presented Shi Shi to the king of Wu as a peace offering. Shi Shi readily offered to sacrifice her happiness and serve the king of Wu as though she was his devoted and loyal concubine. Such was her enduring love for Fan Li. The mighty tyrant took one look at Shi Shi and promptly fell head over heels in love with her. Because he was so obsessed with her, he gradually revealed all the state secrets to Shi Shi while ignoring important national affairs. Shi Shi managed to relay her discoveries to Fan Li, and day by day, Wu state began to fall into decay. In the end, this enabled the king of Yue to finally destroy Wu and realize his dream of national independence. After the victory, Fan Li and Shi Shi quietly disappeared into the countryside, where they spent the rest of their lives together and lived happily ever after. So this was one of the activities that totally just captured me. I just thought it was so beautiful for these older men. You know, they'd worked hard all their lives in these factories for their families, and here they were in their free time choosing to look after these birds, to really they spent a lot of time looking after them. I read stories about their wives not hating the birds, actually, because they spend so much time looking after them and taking them out to a local park for a walk and meeting the other guys. So this is instead of going to a bar, so it's considered a respectable kind of activity, keeping men out of trouble. Anyway, I really identified with this activity, this idea of getting together with your friends, bringing your bird that you look after, and teaching them songs and listening to them sing and in the background. So I just posted this on WeChat to my friends at the time. Do you think China is growing on me? I really want to buy a cage like this and a Huamei and sit with the old men in a park somewhere and listen to the most beautiful girl in Chinese history sing to me all day.